At the wedding, the bouquet I tossed was snatched by Kloe, Liam's childhood friend. She raised an eyebrow at Liam. Liam, I'm giving you one chance. Choose me and leave with me. The groomsmen cheered, pushing Liam toward Kloe. Kloe just confessed. Come on, tell us, who are you going to marry? Liam, what are you shy about? You two were sleeping in the same bed at the bachelor party last night. Liam laughed and lightly kicked a groomsman. He told them to cut it out, gesturing toward me as if my presence alone was sufficient proof of his loyalty. Kloe shrugged with practiced nonchalance, claiming she'd only been joking, that if she'd truly wanted him, no other woman would have stood a chance. Liam turned to me then, tapping the tip of my nose with 2 fingers the way he always had since we were young, and told me casually that they were all just playing around, that we should continue the ceremony. Something cracked open in my chest, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, clean fracture. The kind you only notice when you try to take a breath and find there's no air left. I brushed his hand away, took the microphone from the MC's startled grip, and said into the silence of 200 witnesses, anyone else want to steal this man? Step forward now, because I'm done. The rowdy groomsmen froze. Whispers erupted like a lit fuse through the crowd. Liam grabbed my wrist, his jaw tight, his eyes doing that thing they always did, performing concern while calculating damage. He told me Kloe was only joking, that I was overreacting, that this was the dream wedding I'd been looking forward to for years, that Grandma Helen was still waiting in her hospital room to see the wedding video. The mention of Grandma Helen hit me like a physical blow. The night before, she'd had one of her rare moments of lucidity, her frail hands trembling as she pressed Liam's palm over mine, her clouded eyes glassy with joy. He had knelt beside her hospital bed and promised in that low, solemn voice of his to cherish me forever, to protect me the way my parents never got the chance to. He'd said every word with his chin slightly raised, the way people do when they want to appear earnest. Then he'd gone to the bachelor party and spent the night in a bed with Kloe. My eyes burned. I raised my voice loud enough for the entire venue to hear it bounce off the marble columns. Was sharing a bed with her a joke too? The room convulsed. Heads swiveled between Liam and Kloe like spectators at a match neither side expected to get violent. A flash of raw embarrassment crossed Liam's face. Not guilt, I noticed. Just embarrassment. The particular shame of a man caught not for what he did but for being seen, and he snatched the microphone from my hand and hissed at me to stop, told me I was going to ruin everything. Kloe rescued the moment with a laugh, pointing out that they'd bathed together as toddlers. So really, what was I getting worked up about? The crowd rippled with awkward laughter. I was framed as the hysteric bride, the unreasonable woman making a scene on her own wedding day. Then Liam's mother, Mrs. Miller, slid her arm around Chloe's shoulder and looked at me the way you look at something unpleasant tracked in on someone's shoe. She said, with a smile she didn't bother to soften, that Kloe had always been the daughter-in-law she'd truly wanted, well-bred, graceful, from a proper family, unlike certain people who threw tantrums with no regard for occasion or decorum. Liam cut her off sharply, but his eyes on me weren't filled with love. They were filled with the guilt of a man calculating how much the damage would cost him. My face went cold. My chest went hollow. 10 years ago. My parents had been celebrating their anniversary by the sea when they spotted Liam being dragged under by a rip current. They dove in without hesitation. The way good people do. They never came back up. I had built my entire life inside the debt of that loss, convincing myself that loving Liam was somehow completing a circle my parents had drawn, that their sacrifice had meaning. Standing in $4,000 worth of hand-stitched silk, humiliated in front of 200 people while the man they died for sneered at me for making a scene, I understood for the first time that I had confused grief with devotion and called it love. Kloe pouted theatrically and announced she would leave, arms crossed. The performance of a woman who knows she has already won. And Liam, my Liam, the man who had pressed my hand to his chest in a hospital room the night before and promised forever, rushed after her. He grabbed her around the waist and turned back to me with reproach in his voice, asking me how I could drive away someone who had flown across the world just for our wedding. She smiled at me from inside his arm. It was the smile of someone who had been patient for a very long time. I pulled the ring from my finger and threw it. It struck the marble floor and rang out like a small, perfect gunshot. I told Kloe she didn't have to leave. I would. Liam's voice followed me in a snarl. If I walked out that door, he'd find a new bride before sundown, and he would wait, laughing, for me to come crawling back. I gathered my skirt and ran. Outside, the afternoon sun was blinding. I hailed a taxi, collapsed into the back seat, and could not answer when the driver gently asked where I wanted to go. The rage had already burned through me and left nothing behind but a vast gray emptiness, the kind that arrives not when you lose something precious, but when you realize you'd been holding on to a beautiful, ornate, completely hollow box for a decade and calling it treasure. I had no home. I had sold the last of what my parents left me to cover Grandma Helen's medical bills after the accident that had happened. I later learned through careful, quiet investigation. Because Liam's family had pressured Helen to sign documents rerouting assets from a trust my father had established in Liam's name as a gesture of posthumous goodwill. The other party in Helen's accident had not been a stranger. He had been on Mrs. Miller's payroll. I had not known any of this on the day I sold my childhood home in the rain. I had known only that Liam had arrived on a motorcycle with a credit card, that he had shielded me from the worst of it with his body and his easy grin, and that I had loved him for it in the uncritical, catastrophic way of someone who had lost everything and found one warm thing to hold. I found out the truth not through dramatic confrontation but through 3 months of silence and paperwork. After I walked out of the wedding, I did not call Liam. I did not respond to his first 17 messages, which oscillated between fury and manipulation, with the precision of a man who had always been very good at emotional calibration. I rented a room in a part of the city where no one knew my face. I worked, I slept, I ate, and I spent every spare hour inside the records my late father's estate attorney, a quiet, fiercely loyal woman named Dr. Park who had known my parents since before I was born, had preserved in a fireproof cabinet for exactly this kind of moment. What I found was architectural in its ruthlessness. The trust my father had established after saving Liam from the ocean had been designed as a gift, funds designated for Liam's education. His future, to be administered by Grandma Helen and released in stages contingent on his marriage to me. My father, sentimental and old-fashioned and full of love, had written it as a fairy tale. The Miller family had read it as a contract. Liam had never loved me. He had been managed toward me, incrementally, by a mother who understood that the trust dissolved entirely if he married anyone else before the age of 30, which was 8 months away. The bachelor party, Kloe, the casual cruelty of the wedding, all of it had been the behavior of a man who believed the thing was already secured, that I was too dependent, too grateful, too broken to ever actually leave. He had miscalculated the precise nature of my particular kind of grief. People who have lost everything once and survived it are not fragile. They are catastrophe-proof in a way that comfort can never manufacture. Dr. Park and I spent 6 weeks preparing. We filed for a formal contest of the trust's disbursement conditions. Citing a codicil my father had buried in plain sight, a clause stating that if the designated beneficiary was found to have engaged in deliberate deception or manipulation of the trust's intent, all assets would revert to a charitable foundation in my parents' names. We had text messages, we had financial records, we had a deposition from a former Miller family accountant who had grown a conscience in retirement, we had the accident report, the payroll records, a paper trail so clean it practically sang. The morning the case became public, Liam called me 43 times. I know because I counted later, reading the log with a cup of tea going cold beside me, feeling something I can only describe as the stillness after a very long storm. Mrs. Miller released a statement through her attorney claiming the whole thing was a misunderstanding born of grief. Kloe, for her part, disappeared back to wherever abroad she'd come from, her great romantic gesture quietly folded and put away. Liam showed up at the building where I worked. I watched him on the lobby camera, well-dressed, handsome, his face wearing the specific expression of a man who still believed charm was a skeleton key, and I let security ask him to leave. The trust was restructured by court order 4 months later. Every cent went to the Stella and James Park Foundation, named for my parents, funding ocean rescue training programs along the coastline where they had died. The first cohort of trainees graduated on a Thursday afternoon in early spring, and I stood at the back of the small ceremony in a plain gray dress and watched young people learn how to survive what my parents had not. I did not cry. I had done my crying already, privately. In stages, the way you process a loss that has been composting inside you for years without your knowing it. Grandma Helen passed away quietly 2 weeks after the foundation ceremony. In her last clear moment, which came at 3 in the morning with her hand in mine and a night nurse dozing in the corner, she told me she had always known I was the one worth saving. She said, my parents hadn't died for nothing, that what they'd made in me was worth more than what they'd pulled from the water. I held her hand until it was still, and then I sat with her in the dark for a long time. Not because I was lost, but because I wanted to be present for the ending of something that had taken a long time to end properly. I left the hospital as the sun came up and walked to the water. I had not come to grieve. I had come because the light on the ocean at dawn is one of the few things in the world that is exactly as beautiful as people say it is. And I had spent too long looking at beautiful things through glass, through ceremony, through the performed life of someone who believed love was something you had to earn, by shrinking yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's idea of you. The water was very cold and very loud and entirely indifferent to the fact that I had been through something. I found that I did not mind. I was 28 years old. I had a foundation, a good attorney, a rented apartment with a south-facing window, and the unambiguous knowledge of exactly what I was made of. I had learned it the hard way, on a marble floor in a white dress, with a microphone in my hand and a ring already gone from my finger. But I had learned it completely. Some women discover their own power in quiet rooms. I discovered mine in front of 200 witnesses, and I had to burn an entire decade to the ground to find it. I did not regret the burning. The ash, as it turned out, was excellent for growing things.